They say that money can't buy love, but what if having money is exactly what stops you from finding it? This is the story of Alexander Chen, a man worth $8 billion, who disguised himself as a struggling artist just to find one thing his fortune couldn't buy: someone who would love him for his heart, not his bank account. He would be mocked, humiliated, rejected by the very women who would have thrown themselves at him if they knew the truth. But through the pain, he would discover something priceless. This is his story. Alexander Chen stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office on the 85th floor of Chen Tower in Manhattan. At 32 years old, he was the sole heir to Chen Industries, a multinational conglomerate worth over $8 billion. Everything he touched turned to gold. Everything except his love life. Another date was confirmed for that evening. Another woman who would laugh too loudly at his jokes, touch his arm too often, and plan their wedding before dessert arrived. His assistant Marcus knocked on the door to confirm the reservation. Alexander asked him a simple question: would this woman be excited if he was a school teacher? A plumber? Marcus had no answer. Alexander told him to cancel everything. All the dates. All the pretense. He was done. That night, Alexander made a decision that would change his life forever. He would disappear. Become someone ordinary. Someone invisible. And in that invisibility, he would finally see the truth about people. About love. About whether anything real existed in this world. 3 days later, Alexander Chen ceased to exist. In his place was Alex Rivers, a struggling freelance photographer living in a modest apartment in Brooklyn. He wore thrift store clothes, carried a second-hand camera, and drove a beat-up 1998 Honda Civic that barely started on cold mornings. His childhood friend David, who ran a small coffee shop, thought he was crazy. David asked what would happen when he met someone. Would he just lie to them? Alexander paused before answering. He preferred to think of it as discovering who people really are. If a woman could love Alex Rivers, the struggling photographer, then maybe she could love Alexander Chen too. But Alexander had no idea how painful the truth would be. Alex met Vanessa Whitmore at an art gallery opening in Chelsea. She was beautiful, elegant, wearing a designer dress that cost more than his entire monthly rent. They struck up a conversation about the artwork. She seemed interested in him, asking if he was a photographer. When he told her he was freelance, still building his portfolio, he watched the light in her eyes dim ever so slightly. They talked for another hour. Vanessa laughed at his jokes, seemed genuinely engaged. Alexander felt hope bloom in his chest. Maybe this could work. Maybe she was different. He asked if she'd like to grab coffee sometime at a great little place in Brooklyn. Vanessa cut him off. Brooklyn? She didn't really do Brooklyn. But if he ever made it big and got gallery representation, he should look her up. Her heels clicked away across the polished floor. As she walked away, Alexander heard her on the phone with a friend. Her voice carried across the gallery. She laughed about the freelance photographer who tried to ask her out. To Brooklyn. How desperate did he think she was? She didn't spend 4 years at Yale to date someone who probably lived with roommates. The words cut deeper than Alexander expected. He'd been rejected before, but never like this. Never so casually dismissed as if his humanity was measured solely by his tax bracket. He stood alone in the gallery, surrounded by expensive art and expensive people, wondering if this was how the world really worked when you weren't on top. But the pain had only just begun. 2 weeks later, Alex met Madison Taylor at a rooftop party in Soho. She was a social media influencer with 2 million followers, and everything about her was carefully curated for the camera. Her smile, her laugh, even the way she held her drink, all of it was content. Madison called him super cute and immediately asked for his Instagram handle. How many followers did he have? When he told her about 800, she laughed. That was actually kind of adorable. He was like a baby account. Despite the condescension, they exchanged numbers. Madison suggested they meet up for what she called a collaboration opportunity. Alexander thought it was a date. 3 days later, they met at a trendy cafe in Manhattan. Alex arrived 5 minutes early, nervous but hopeful. Madison arrived 20 minutes late, phone in hand, barely making eye contact. She explained her vision. He could take photos of her for her feed, and she'd tag him. Great exposure. With her platform, he could probably get 100 new followers, easy. When Alexander said he thought this was just them getting to know each other, Madison looked confused. She told him he was sweet, but she didn't really date guys who weren't established. Her brand required a certain aesthetic. Dating someone who was still figuring things out didn't fit the narrative. Her followers expected her to date successful men. Verified accounts. Blue checks. Surely he understood it was business. She stood up, still scrolling through her phone, and suggested he DM her if he wanted to shoot her content. They could do a whole struggling artist meets influencer thing. It might actually be super authentic. Alexander sat alone at the table, his coffee growing cold. Around him, people typed away on laptops, chased their dreams, lived their lives. And he realized that to Madison, he wasn't a person. He was a prop. A potential storyline. And without the right metrics, he wasn't even worth that. Was love just another transaction now? Another business deal? Another post to optimize for engagement? The third rejection was the one that almost broke him. Her name was Catherine Pierce, and unlike the others, she actually gave him a chance. Or so he thought. Alex met Catherine at David's coffee shop. She was reading a book on philosophy, her hair falling over her face as she scribbled notes in the margins. She looked real. Genuine. Human. They started talking about Kierkegaard, about aesthetic versus ethical life, about the crushing weight of modern existence and the small joys that made it bearable. They talked for 3 hours that day. For the first time in weeks, Alexander felt seen. Not for his money, not for his status, but for his mind. His heart. His soul. Over the next month, they were inseparable. Coffee dates turned into long walks through Central Park. Walks turned into late-night conversations on his modest apartment rooftop, staring at the stars you could barely see through the city lights. One night, Catherine told him what she loved about him. He was real. Not trying to impress anyone. Just himself. Did he know how rare that was? Alexander almost told her the truth that night. Almost. But something held him back. Just a little longer, he thought. Just to be sure. Then came the party. A mutual friend was celebrating a promotion at a high-end restaurant. Catherine suggested they go together, it would be fun, plus there would be really successful people there. Good for networking. At the party, Alexander watched Catherine's eyes light up as she met Marcus Wellington, a 35-year-old hedge fund manager with slick-back hair and a watch that cost more than most cars. Catherine told Marcus she'd been following his career. That deal he closed last quarter? Brilliant. Alexander stood beside her, invisible. Translucent. He watched as Marcus barely acknowledged his existence, as Catherine slowly drifted toward the hedge fund manager's orbit like a planet caught by a larger star's gravity. Hours passed. Catherine barely looked his way. When the party ended, she was still laughing at Marcus's jokes, touching his arm, leaning in close. The next morning, she called. They needed to talk. Alexander told her he already knew. Catherine's voice was nervous but firm. He was an amazing guy. She cared about him so much. But she and Marcus had connected last night. Really connected. He was offering her opportunities. He could introduce her to people who could help her career. He was established. Secure. And she needed that right now. Alexander asked what happened to being real. To not trying to impress anyone. His voice was breaking. Catherine paused. That was easy to say when you're young and idealistic. But the real world required real resources. She was 29. She couldn't wait around for a struggling artist to maybe make it someday. Marcus was offering her the life she'd always wanted. Alexander asked about love. Just love. Catherine's answer came slowly. She did love him. In her own way. But love didn't pay the bills. Love didn't get you into the right rooms or introduce you to the right people. She was sorry. She really was. But she had to choose herself. The line went dead. Alexander sat in his small apartment, surrounded by the photographs he'd taken of Catherine. Her laughing in the park. Reading on his rooftop. Being, or at least pretending to be, the person she claimed she was. For the first time since starting his experiment, Alexander Chen considered ending it. What was the point? If every woman was the same, if love was just another commodity to be bought and sold, why keep searching? But he didn't know that his life was about to change. That in his darkest moment, a light was about to break through. Her name was Emma Rodriguez. And she would show him that true love wasn't dead. It was just rare. Precious. Worth waiting for. 2 weeks after Catherine broke his heart, Alexander was at his lowest. He wandered the city like a ghost, taking photographs of nothing, caring about nothing. He'd lost faith in his experiment. Lost faith in people. It was a Thursday afternoon, and the rain came down in sheets. Alexander ducked into a small community center in Queens, shaking water from his jacket. The place was humble, scuffed floors, motivational posters from the 1990s, the smell of instant coffee and determination. A volunteer asked if he was here for the literacy program. They taught English to immigrants and adults who were learning to read. Always needed more volunteers. He looked like he could use something to do. Alexander almost said no. But something about the warmth in the woman's eyes, the genuine invitation, made him pause. Sure, he told her. Why not? That's where he met her. Emma Rodriguez. She was helping an elderly Chinese woman sound out words in a children's book, her patience infinite, her smile radiant. She wore scrubs, the kind nurses wore, and her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup. No pretense. No performance. When the lesson ended, Emma noticed Alexander standing awkwardly by the door. She introduced herself and offered to show him around. Fair warning, it was chaos, but it was the kind of chaos that made you remember why humanity was worth saving. Over the next hour, Emma showed him how to be patient with beginners, how to celebrate small victories, how to see the person behind the struggle. She told him she did this 3 times a week. She worked as a nurse at Mount Sinai, late shifts mostly, but she always made time for this. These people were so brave. They came here after working 12-hour shifts, after raising their kids, after everything, and they still wanted to learn. They still believed things could get better. How could she not show up for that? Alexander was genuinely moved. Emma smiled and said it was just being human. We're supposed to help each other. Somewhere along the way, people forgot that. For the first time in weeks, Alexander felt something stir in his chest. Not attraction, not yet. But recognition. Like finding a landmark in fog. Something real in a world that had felt increasingly fake. Over the next 6 weeks, Alexander showed up to volunteer every Thursday. He told himself it was about the program, about giving back. But he knew the truth. It was about her. Emma Rodriguez was 28 years old. She'd grown up in the Bronx, the daughter of Dominican immigrants who'd worked 3 jobs between them to give their children a better life. Her father was a maintenance worker. Her mother cleaned houses. They taught Emma that wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in love, family, and the lives you touched. During breaks, Emma told him about her parents. They were her heroes. They never had much, but what they had, they shared. Their door was always open. There was always one more plate at the table. That's how she was raised, to see people, not transactions. Alexander said that was rare. Emma disagreed. It shouldn't be. She asked about his story. Alexander carefully constructed his lie, hating every word. Not much to tell. Parents weren't around much. Raised mostly by nannies in boarding schools. Learned early that you can't count on people, only yourself. Emma's voice went soft. That was sad. Everyone should have someone they can count on. Alexander asked her a question. Even if they can't give you anything? Emma looked confused. What did he mean? He pressed forward. What if someone she loved couldn't provide for her? Couldn't give her the life she wanted? Emma's answer was immediate. The life she wanted wasn't about things. It was about waking up next to someone who made her laugh. Coming home to someone who asked about her day and actually cared about the answer. Building something together, even if that something was small. Her parents lived in a 1-bedroom apartment for 15 years. Were they rich? No. Were they happy? Incredibly. That's what she wanted. Alexander felt tears sting his eyes. Years of cynicism, of armor, of protection began to crack. They started meeting outside the community center. Not dates. Emma insisted they were friend hangs, though Alexander hoped for more. They'd grab dollar pizza and walk along the East River. They'd share a subway seat, shoulders touching, talking about everything and nothing. One evening, Emma asked why he loved photography. What made him fall in love with it? Alexander thought carefully before answering. Photographs don't lie. They show you the truth of a moment. The real emotion. The actual person. In a world where everyone's wearing masks, cameras see through them. Emma asked if that's what he was doing. Trying to see through people's masks. Alexander admitted it quietly. Something like that. Emma told him what she saw when she looked at him. Someone who'd been hurt. Someone who was afraid to trust. But also someone with the kindest heart she'd ever met. He was patient with Mrs. Chen when she forgot the same word 3 times. He brought coffee for everyone last week out of his own pocket, she'd noticed. He saw people. Really saw them. That was rare. She paused, then added simply, she was glad she met him. Alexander's voice was thick with emotion. He was glad he met her too. It happened on a Saturday. Emma texted him at 6 a.m. Emergency at the hospital. She was supposed to visit her parents in the Bronx today but couldn't make it. Would he do her the craziest favor and drop off some groceries for them? She knew it was asking a lot. They were expecting her and she hated to disappoint them. Alexander texted back immediately. send me the address. He had it. He drove to the Bronx in his beat-up Honda, bags of groceries in the trunk. The neighborhood was working-class, bodegas on corners, kids playing in fire hydrant spray, the smell of pernil and rice drifting from open windows. When he knocked, Emma's father Carlos opened the door, confused. Alexander explained that he was Emma's friend, that she was stuck at the hospital, and asked him to drop these off. Before he could escape, Emma's mother Maria rushed to the door. "Emma's Alex? Come in, come in." He couldn't just drop groceries and leave. For the next 3 hours, Alexander sat at the Rodriguez family table. Maria insisted he eat and eat and eat. Carlos showed him photos of Emma as a child, told embarrassing stories that made Alexander laugh until his stomach hurt. Maria told him about 7-year-old Emma finding a stray cat. They'd said no, they couldn't afford a pet. So Emma got a job helping the bodega owner after school. Saved every penny for cat food and vet visits. That was their Emma. She sees something that needs love, she gives it. Carlos became more serious. Emma had been hurt before. Dated a man who promised her the world. Turned out he wanted her to change everything about herself. Wanted her to quit nursing, to be someone she wasn't. Broke her heart. But she was strong. She knew what mattered. Family. Love. Character. These things don't change when times are hard. Alexander's voice shook when he asked his question. If Emma fell in love with someone who had nothing, would that disappoint them? Carlos's answer was firm. When they came to this country, they had one suitcase and $200. They worked for everything. Built everything from nothing. Did he think they cared about money? No. They cared about one thing: will this person love our daughter? Will they respect her? Will they stand by her when things are hard? Maria added that money comes and goes. Character stays. He seemed like a good man. That's all that matters. When Alexander left that evening, hugging both parents goodbye, he sat in his car for 20 minutes. Everything he thought he knew about love, about people, about the world, was shifting. Emma wasn't different despite having nothing. She was different because she'd learned what mattered from people who knew. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling of his modest Brooklyn apartment, knowing he was at a crossroads. Emma was everything he'd been searching for. Kind. Real. Unpretentious. She saw him, not his money, not his status, just him. But the fear paralyzed him. She loves Alex Rivers, the struggling photographer. But can she love Alexander Chen, the billionaire? Or would he become just another rich guy to her? Another symbol of the world she doesn't want to be part of? Something else scared him more: losing her without ever telling her the truth. 2 days later, he asked her to meet him at Brooklyn Bridge Park. It was sunset, the city glowing gold across the water. Emma said it was beautiful. What was the occasion? Alexander told her he needed to say something. And he needed her to let him get through it all before she said anything. Emma's voice was concerned. He was scaring her. Alexander began. These past few months with her had been the best of his life. She'd reminded him that good people exist. That kindness isn't dead. That love doesn't have to be a transaction. But he hadn't been completely honest with her. His name was Alex, but not Alex Rivers. It was Alexander Chen. And he wasn't a struggling photographer. He was the heir to Chen Industries. He was worth more money than he could explain right now. The silence stretched between them. Emma's voice came slowly. He lied to her. Yes, Alexander admitted. And he knew how that sounded. He knew what she must think of him. But please, let him explain. He'd been hurt so many times. By women who saw his bank account instead of his heart. Who wanted what he could give them, not who he was. He needed to know if anyone could love him without all of that. If he could trust someone. If real love even existed. Emma's voice broke. So she was what? A test? An experiment? At first, maybe, Alexander confessed. But she had to believe him. What he felt for her was real. The most real thing he'd ever felt. She saw him. The actual him. Not the money, not the status. She saw his heart. Emma was crying now. How could she know that? How could she know any of this was real if he'd been lying from the start? Alexander's answer came desperately. Because he was telling her now. Because he was choosing her. Not his company, not his reputation, not his safety. Horror. He'd give it all up if it meant he could be with her. Emma's response was quiet but firm. She didn't want him to give it all up. She just wanted honesty. She'd shared her whole life with him. Her family, her dreams, her fears. And he gave her a character he created. She paused, then delivered the blow. She needed time. She needed to think about this. About what it meant. About whether she could trust him. Alexander told her he understood. Take all the time she needed. She walked away, leaving Alexander standing alone by the water as the sun disappeared below the horizon. He'd finally told the truth. But he might have lost everything that mattered in the process. Emma didn't sleep for 3 days. She called into work, told them she had the flu. In reality, she had something worse, a crisis of faith. Everything she thought she knew had been turned upside down. Her mother called, sensing something was wrong. Emma sounded terrible. What was going on? Emma asked her a hypothetical. What if everything you thought about someone was wrong? What if they lied to you, but they said it was because they loved you? Maria knew immediately. This was about Alex. Emma told her mother everything. The disguise. The lie. The revelation. When she finished, there was a long silence. Maria asked a simple question. Did she love him? Emma was confused. What did that matter? Her mother repeated it. Not did she love what he did. Did she love him? The man who volunteered with her. Who drove to the Bronx to help them. Who listened to her dreams. That man, did she love him? Emma was crying. Yes. God help her, yes. Then the question wasn't whether he lied, Maria explained. The question was why. And whether he was the same man without the lie. Was he? Emma admitted she didn't know anymore. What if the money changed things? What if she couldn't be herself around that world? Carlos took the phone. When he met Emma's mother, he was nobody. A janitor. She was the daughter of a respected family in Santo Domingo. Her father didn't want her to marry down. But Maria looked at his hands. These hands that cleaned toilets and mopped floors. And she said these were good hands. Honest hands. That's all she needed. Carlos continued. Money doesn't make a man. Character makes a man. From what Emma had told them, this Alexander had character. He learned from his pain instead of becoming bitter. He searched for real love. He found it in her. The question was, would she let his past mistakes destroy their future happiness? Emma pulled out her phone, Googled Alexander Chen, and for the first time, saw his real world. The internet revealed a man she didn't recognize. Alexander Chen, billionaire heir. Photos of him in tuxedos at charity galas. But she watched interviews. And she saw it. The same man. The same values. The same loneliness behind his eyes. She made a decision. Alexander hadn't left his apartment in 5 days. On the 6th day, there was a knock at his door. He opened it to find Emma standing there, holding 2 cups of coffee. She asked if she could come in. They needed to talk. Emma spoke first. She'd spent the last week angry, hurt, confused. She'd Googled him, read everything. Watched his interviews. Learned about his past relationships. About the women who'd used him. She understood now why he lied. Not that it made it okay. But she understood. She told him about her ex Richard, a corporate lawyer who tried to change her. When she refused, he told her she was being selfish. That's why this hurts so much. Because she thought Alexander was different. And he was. The Alex she fell in love with was real. She needed to know if Alexander Chen and Alex Rivers could exist in the same body. Alexander's voice was raw. They weren't 2 people. There was only him. Scared. Lonely. Desperate for someone to see past the money. Emma did that. And he'd never felt more loved in his entire life. He would walk away from all of it if that's what she needed. Emma's eyes filled with tears. She didn't want him to walk away. She wanted him to be both. All of it. Because all of it was him. Could he do that? Could he be authentic in both worlds? Could he let her be herself in his world? Alexander promised he could. They'd figure it out together. Emma smiled through her tears. Then she needed him to trust her. Really trust her. No more tests. No more walls. Just them. Alexander crossed the room and took her hands. Losing her hurt more than anything anyone had ever done to him. So yes. No more walls. No more fear. Just them. Emma stepped forward and kissed him. For the first time in his life, Alexander Chen felt free. 2 years later, Emma and Alexander stood in the same community center where they'd met. Today they were cutting the ribbon on the new Emma Rodriguez Literacy and Education Center, fully funded by the Chun Foundation. Emma was 5 months pregnant. She'd cut back her hospital hours but still worked 3 days a week. Alexander had stepped back from Chun Industries, focusing on the foundation and his photography. As they cut the ribbon together, Emma leaned into Alexander's side. Mrs. Chen had asked if the baby was going to volunteer too. Apparently it was a family tradition now. Alexander laughed and kissed the top of her head. Their child would grow up knowing that wealth was a privilege, not a right. That love was more valuable than money. That the most important thing you could do was see people and help when you could. Alexander thought about his journey. He'd disguised himself as a poor man to find true love. He'd been rejected, humiliated, heartbroken. He'd wanted to give up. But he'd kept searching. And he'd found Emma. She taught him that love wasn't about what you could offer, but who you were. That the right person would see your heart before your bank account. That real love was patient, kind, and worth waiting for. Vanessa, Madison, and Catherine were still out there. Still searching. still measuring love in dollars instead of character. They'd had their chance and let it slip away. They'd live with that regret forever. But Alexander and Emma? They'd built something that money couldn't buy. A love based on truth and trust. As they stood together, watching the community celebrate, Emma took his hand and placed it on her belly. Their baby kicked. This was what wealth really meant. Not billions in a bank account, but this moment. This woman. This life they'd built together. In a world that measures worth in dollars and status, Alexander and Emma proved that the most valuable things can't be bought. True love is found in honesty and vulnerability. In seeing someone for who they really are and loving them anyway. Alexander Chin had everything money could buy. But it was Emma Rodriguez, who had nothing, who gave him everything that mattered. And they lived happily ever after. This is their story. A reminder that true love still exists. It's just rare. Precious. Worth waiting for. And worth fighting for. The end.